Now to a cold case that's possibly been cracked with the help of DNA evidence. A man is now facing charges in Alabama for killing two teenage girls nearly 20 years ago. And Amy is here with how the police tracked him down. Good morning, Amy.
All right, good morning to you, Michael. Yes, DNA registries are the newest tool for investigators, helping police nab suspects in several high-profile cases, cold cases. Most notably, the Golden State serial killings. Well, now it could finally help bring closure for two Alabama families.
Warning: what you are about to watch is a true story. The following programs contains content some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. A patrol car sat behind that Mazda for 6 hours before anyone thought to check the trunk. 6 hours. Officers circled it, ran the plates, waited on a tow truck, and never once looked underneath the one part of the vehicle that mattered. When someone finally did, two families who'd spent the whole night telling themselves everything was fine found out they'd already run out of time before the sun came up. Quick note before we go further: this case involves the murder of two teenage girls and evidence that one of them was also assaulted. We're not going to describe either. What matters here is how this case broke, and how long it took. New to the channel? Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We read every one. And if you want cases handled this way, fact by fact, subscribe. This one takes its time getting to the truth, and it's worth the wait. Back to that Mazda. No damage, no forced entry, cash still in both wallets. Whoever left it there wasn't after money. Rewind 12 hours. J.B. Beasley turned 17 that day, July 31st, 1999. A cheerleader, honor society, the kind of girl who filled a room without trying. Her best friend since middle school was Tracie Hawlett, 5 months older, raised most of her life by a stepfather who never once called her anything but his daughter. Her real father, a police officer, had drowned when she was 4, and the local department had quietly kept an eye on her ever since, the way departments do for their own. That night, the two of them left Dothan in JB's black Mazda, heading to a birthday party 10 miles up the road. They missed the turn. Somewhere in the dark, 10 miles became 20, and they ended up somewhere neither of them had ever been, a closed gas station in a town called Ozark. A woman named Marilyn Merritt was in the lot with her daughter, buying sodas. The girls asked for directions. Merritt gave them clear ones, said later they were polite, tidy, worried about exactly one thing: getting home before it got too late. Tracie found a payphone, called her mother, said they'd taken a wrong turn, but they had directions now. Then, before she hung up, she said 5 words. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of thing you say to your mother on an ordinary night, not knowing it's the last thing she'll ever hear you say. Merritt watched the taillights pull out, following her directions exactly, toward the highway. Nobody saw them again. By morning, both families had called each other, then called the police, and somewhere in Ozark, an officer had already spotted the car, parked, empty, untouched, a block from the hospital, sitting in plain sight since sometime around midnight. Here's where this case starts to go wrong before it's even begun. The investigator who arrived to have the car towed did everything by the book. Walked the vehicle, checked the plates, noted the license on the dashboard, the wallets untouched on the seats, one window cracked, mud streaked across every panel, like the car had been somewhere far rougher than a paved road in town. He waited for the tow truck, for 6 hours. It wasn't until early afternoon that he found a release lever tucked inside the car, the kind that pops a trunk without a key. He pulled it. Both girls were inside. Each had been shot once. A single shell casing sat on one of their legs. The other was never found. Their clothes were still on. Their shoes, new that summer, were caked in mud. Briars were caught in the fabric of one girl's pants. Wherever this happened, it wasn't Herring Avenue. That street was dry. That street was just where they'd been left. Robbery made no sense. Nothing was taken except one item, a keychain, small block letters spelling out 2 words, hard to get. For 2 months, that's all investigators had. A double homicide. No motive that held together. No weapon. No suspect. Then the state crime lab called with something that changed the entire shape of the case. Biological evidence recovered from JB's clothing. Semen. The district attorney at the time, David Emery, put it plainly to reporters. Whatever this was, it had a sexual component, and finding the man behind that sample meant finding the killer. They ran it against Alabama's database. Nothing. Against the FBI's National Index, CODIS. Nothing there either. The DNA was flawless, complete. It pointed to exactly one man alive. The problem was, that man had never been arrested for anything in his life, which meant, as far as any database in the country was concerned, he didn't exist. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't the kind of case that gets solved fast. That's exactly why we cover it. Subscribe if you want more of these, built the same way, patiently, one piece of evidence at a time. A reward climbed past $15,000 in local donations alone. The governor added 10,000 more. Investigators ran down more than 500 interviews and tested over 70 men against that DNA profile. Every single one came back clean. A man walked into the police station a month later, claiming he'd witnessed the whole thing. Over 4 hours, his story changed 6 separate times. By the end, he was naming a stranger who'd supposedly done it while he watched from his own car. Investigators tested that stranger's DNA, cleared, brought the confessor before a grand jury, where he finally admitted he'd made the entire thing up, chasing reward money. He'd never been anywhere near Herring Avenue. A security camera at the gas station had captured a blurry white pickup truck sitting at the pump the whole time Tracie was on that payphone. Nobody bought gas. Nobody in Ozark recognized it. Police released the image publicly. Not one person ever came forward. Every lead did this, pulled investigators in hard for weeks, sometimes months, then simply came apart. The file got thinner, not thicker. For one of the mothers, Carol Roberts, the case never really went cold at all. She told reporters years later she hadn't slept through a single full night since that call. Her husband, Mike, who'd raised Tracie since she was small, showed up to every hearing, every briefing, every year, even when there was nothing new to hear. The case ran on America's Most Wanted, featured again, years later, on another true crime program. Tips poured in from across the country. None of them carried a name. The DNA sat exactly as it had been extracted, precise, complete, and useless. Because a perfect answer with no name attached to compare it to isn't an answer. It's just a very exact description of a stranger. 19 years in, a case out in California cracked something open. A man named Joseph James DeAngelo, the so-called Golden State Killer, was finally identified after 4 decades free, using a method nobody in law enforcement had tried before, uploading crime scene DNA to a public genealogy website, where ordinary people had voluntarily traced their own family trees. The search doesn't find the killer directly, it finds his cousins, distant relatives who share fragments of his DNA without ever knowing it. From there, investigators build the tree backward, branch by branch, until one name fits every remaining gap. Ozark's police chief followed that story closely. He had his own unsolved file, sitting in the same drawer it had been in for 2 decades. He reached out to the same genealogy lab that helped crack the DeAngelo case, Parabon Nanolabs, working alongside genetic genealogist C.C. Moore. He sent them the 1999 sample and asked for the same process. Find the relatives. Build the tree. Narrow it down. The results came back as a list of Alabama families whose genetic markers overlapped with the crime scene sample. One name on that list stopped the chief cold, not because it came from a tip or a file, but because he recognized it personally. They'd gone to school together. That man had spent the entire 20 years living less than a mile from where the girls' bodies were found. Married, 2 kids, a truck driver, a minister who'd started his own small ministry years earlier, church every Sunday, a neighbor you'd wave to without thinking twice. His name was Coley McCraney. And here's the detail that should sit with you longer than any other in this entire case. A year before that genealogy list ever existed, a judge had already ordered McCraney to submit a DNA sample, for an unrelated child support case, filed the day before the murders. He simply never showed up for the appointment. Had he gone that one time, this case might have ended in 1999, not 2 decades later. The chief didn't bring him in as a suspect. He called him in as an old classmate who might help narrow down a list of possibilities. McCraney's wife came with him, sat beside him, told him he should cooperate. 20 years of marriage had given her no reason to think otherwise. He gave the swab without hesitation. The match came back unambiguous, not similar, identical. When investigators sat him down with the result, McCraney denied everything, said he'd never met either girl, said he'd never even been near Ozark that night. In March of 2019, he was arrested and charged with capital murder and rape. The state announced it would pursue the death penalty. What moved through Dothan and Ozark in the days after wasn't relief. It was something heavier. A pastor, a father, a man who'd shopped at the same stores, driven the same roads, sat in the same pews as the families of the girls he was accused of killing, for 20 straight years, without a single person ever looking at him twice. COVID pushed the trial back years. It finally opened in April 2023, 24 years after that phone call home. McCraney made the rare choice to take the stand himself, and the story he told bore no resemblance to the flat denial he'd given investigators in 2019. This time, he said he'd met JB at a mall months earlier, that she'd told him her name was Jennifer, that they'd exchanged numbers, that they'd planned to meet that very night. He claimed his truck broke down at that same gas station by coincidence, that the girls gave him a ride, that what happened between them afterward was consensual, and that they dropped him home before continuing on alone. The prosecution took that story apart piece by piece. No phone record, no witness, no trace of contact between him and JB before that night existed anywhere. Merritt's account from the gas station didn't support it either. 2 girls anxious about nothing except getting home, showing no sign of meeting anyone. Then came his wife, the same woman who'd sat beside him at that police station, certain there was nothing to worry about. Under oath, she placed him leaving the house that night around 10 and not returning until well past midnight, later than he'd ever been out on any other night in their marriage. His explanation to her at the time, car trouble, at a gas station. The same gas station where 2 girls had made their last phone call home. The jury deliberated one day, guilty, on every count. The following spring, formal sentencing landed him life without parole. His attorneys fought for a new trial, alleging jurors had discussed the case on social media during deliberations. That request was denied. He appealed further, all the way to the Alabama Supreme Court, which, in December 2024, declined to even hear it, closing the door for good. Carol Roberts sat completely still when the verdict came down. Later, she told reporters she'd simply gone numb, 24 years, and finally, someone was being held accountable. Cheryl Burgoon, JB's mother, broke down in her seat. Mike Roberts had been in that courtroom for every hearing across 2.5 decades. He lived long enough to hear the word guilty. He passed away less than a year later. McCraney maintains his innocence to this day, from inside a maximum security facility in Alabama, insisting people can believe whatever they want about him. What actually closed this case wasn't a confession, and it wasn't a lucky break. It was a genealogy method built for tracing family trees, repurposed to trace a killer, applied to a sample that had sat in a lab, untouched and unidentified, for 20 years, waiting on a name nobody thought to look for until a case on the other side of the country proved it was possible. That's usually how the coldest cases end. Not a witness stepping forward. A new tool, pointed at old evidence, finally asking the right question. If this one held your attention, tell us in the comments which detail stuck with you most, the missing keychain, or the DNA sample he never gave a year before any of this happened. Subscribe if you want more cases handled exactly this way. See you at the next file.